this video, I am going to discuss about what is micro and what is macroeconomics. The learning outcomes of this video. At the end of this lecture, students are able to understand the differences between micro and macroeconomics, the importance of microeconomics and its relevance, the importance of macroeconomics and its relevance in different economies. Generally, we discuss what is economics. Economics is a social science that studies how people interact with things of value, in particular, the production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services. So, economics is a social science. So, it will study how people interact with things of value. That is, how we produce goods and services. That means, whenever it is using the factors of production, by using raw materials, how it will convert the raw materials into finished goods and services. That process we are calling it as production. And whenever we are using factors of production, in the process of production, we'll pay the remunerations to the factors of production for land, rent, for labor, wages, for capital, interest, and for entrepreneur, the profit. This process of paying remunerations to the factors of production, that is called distribution. And whenever the consumer is using the finished goods and services, that process we are calling it as consumption of goods and services. What are the differences between micro and macroeconomics? The person who has made this distinction between microeconomics and macroeconomics, that person is Ragnar Frisch of Oslo University, has first used these two. That means he is the first person who made the distinction between microeconomics and macroeconomics. Whenever we are talking about the microeconomics, so the micro word came from the Greek, that is micro means small. It's a branch of economics that studies the behavior of individuals and firms in making decisions regarding the allocation of regarding the allocation of individuals and firms in making decisions regarding the allocation of scarce resources and the interactions among these individuals and firms. Microeconomics studies about the behavior of individuals and firms. It's it studies about the decisions, how it make decisions, and whatever the resources are available, that resources are scarce resources. That means we are having so many wants, and the resources by which we are fulfilling those wants are scarce. So then how we'll allocate those resources, that we are calling it as that subject we are studying, that how we are going to allocate the scarce resources, then we are calling it as microeconomics. And here, macroeconomics, that is, macro means large. It means using interest rates, taxes, and government spending to regulate an economy's growth and stability. Here we are bothering about the total economy's growth and stability. So it is a branch of economics dealing with the performance, structure, behavior, and decision making of an economy. Here we are bothering about individuals and firm, and here we are bothering about the total economy. So microeconomics means we are talking about the individuals and firms in making decisions, whereas in macroeconomics we are talking about the total economy as a whole. And the second difference we can take that microeconomics analyzes basic elements in the economy, including individual agents and markets. That means whenever we are dealing with the microeconomics, it studies about the individual agents and markets and how it will interact and how the outcomes of interactions. So that means households, individual, a firm or buyer or seller. So whenever we are talking about the microeconomics, it will go in detail how the individual is reacting in a particular situation, how that household is consuming, and how that firm is producing, and how the buyer is buying any good, or how the seller is selling any particular good. So all these are the study, it will come under microeconomics. One goal of microeconomics is that to analyze the market mechanism that establish total prices among goods and services and find out the solution to the problems facing the economy as a whole. So whenever we are talking about different aspects, then we'll be thinking about that, how we have to find out the solution to any problem when we are thinking about the economy as a whole. Macroeconomics shows conditions under which free markets lead to desirable allocations. That means it will analyze the market failure, how we have to bring about any change in the market, and how we have to resolve the problem which has occurred in the market. Next differences means the person who gave more importance to microeconomics is Alfred Marshall, whereas the person who gave more importance to the macroeconomics is John Maynard Keynes. Microeconomics came into existence with Alfred Marshall's principles of economics. That is, Alfred Marshall has written a book that is Principles of Economics. In that, he gave more importance to microeconomics. Whereas in macroeconomics, that is John Maynard Keynes, he has written a book that is General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money. So in that book, he gave more importance to macroeconomics. Whenever we were talking or whenever we were discussing about macroeconomics, the Great Depression, which has occurred in the year 1929-30, so the classical economists, they have faced a difficulty to explain how goods could go unsold and workers could be left unemployed. That means they were unable to find out the solution for the problem which has occurred in the depression times. So how the unemployment problem is created in the economy, they were unable to explain, and why the supply or whatever the goods which are piling up in the economy, why it is not going to be demanded by the consumers. So they were unable to explain. So all these problems, so according to JB, whatever the goods which were produced in the economy, so those goods, the supply creates its own demand. So that law was totally a flaw in the depression times. So that is the reason that J.M. Keynes has found out a different solution by studying this macro approach. Microeconomics studies the economic behavior of individual, whereas macroeconomics studies about the total economy. Microeconomics studies the economic behavior of individual, economic units, and economic variables. It studies about the individual units, the study of individual household or firms and industries. So all these will come under microeconomics. Whereas macroeconomics means the study of economy-wide phenomena. So here includes national, regional, global economies, that is national output, national income, unemployment, inflation. So it studies of the economy as a whole. So that is the difference between microeconomics. Microeconomics studies about individual units, whereas macroeconomics studies the study of the economy as a whole, and it will find out the solutions for the problems that how we can enhance the national output and how we can enhance national income, and what are the problems which are related to unemployment, how we can increase the employment opportunities, and why the problem of inflation is occurring in the economy, and how can we solve the problem of inflation. All these problems and remedies we can study under macroeconomics. So in microeconomics, individual markets we are studying, whereas in macroeconomics, the whole economy we are studying. And whenever we are discussing about the whole economy, the gross domestic product, that is GDP means gross domestic product, we are studying in macroeconomics. Here in microeconomics, the effect on price of a good. So here we are studying what is the change in the price of a good. But here we are studying the inflation, that is whatever the change which is occurring in the general price level, that we are going to study in the macroeconomics. Here, individual labor market means whenever we are thinking about that in the labor market, whether any individual is getting employment or not. But here we are bothering about in macroeconomic approach, that is total employment or the total unemployment which is existing in any economy. And here individual consumer behavior in microeconomics we are studying, whereas in macroeconomics we are studying about the aggregate demand. Here in micro approach, we are studying about the supply of good, and whereas in macro approach, that productive capacity of economy we are studying. So here we can find out what are the differences between the microeconomics and macroeconomics. Microeconomics studies about the individual markets, whereas macroeconomics studies about the whole economy. Whereas in microeconomics, we are studying the effect of on price of a good, whereas the general price level, how the prices are increasing in any economy, and what are the solutions by which we can solve this problem. And in microeconomic approach, that individual labor market, whereas in macroeconomic approach, employment opportunities, how they are prevailing in any economy and how the problem is rising, that unemployment problem. And in microeconomics, individual consumer behavior we are studying, whereas in macroeconomics, the aggregate demand approach we are studying. And here in microeconomics, the supply of good, one good we are studying, and whereas in the macroeconomic approach, the productive capacity of economy, that means aggregate supply, we are discussing in macroeconomics. Microeconomics deals with the effects of economic policies, whereas that is taxation levels and microeconomic behavior. That means whatever the taxation policy is there, how it will bring change in one person, that we are going to study in microeconomics. That is, modern macroeconomic theories has been built upon micro foundations. That means whatever we are framing that macro approach, that is having this micro foundation, that is based upon basic assumptions about micro level behavior. But whereas in macroeconomics study topics such as GDP, gross domestic product, unemployment rates, national income, price indices, that is output, consumption, unemployment, inflation, saving, investment, energy, international trade, and international finance. All these are the macro approaches. That is gross domestic product, how it will prevailing in any economy, and unemployment rate and national income. So the labor and capital acting upon its natural resources, how it will produce a net aggregate of commodities, and then price index and output, consumption, the total consumption, then unemployment and inflation, total saving, total investment. That means whenever we are discussing about the macroeconomics, the total concepts which are prevailing in any economy, that is called macro approach. So microeconomics is derived from micro. We have already discussed this, and it is a small means millionth part. The other name for microeconomics is called price theory. Whereas for macroeconomics, it has been derived from macro, that is large, and the theory of income and employment. This is the other name for macroeconomics. It studies about the individual firm, industry, or consumer, whereas macroeconomics, it is an analysis of aggregates and averages pertains to the entire economy. It discusses about the national income, gross domestic product, total employment, total output, total consumption, aggregate demand, aggregate supply, etc. It studies only the employment in a firm, whereas it studies about the total employment. It studies about the flow of economic resources or factors of production from the resource owners to business firms. It relates to the flow of goods and services from business firms to households, whereas macroeconomics looks to the nation's total economic activity to determine economic policies and promote economic progress. Whenever we are discussing about the total economy, then it will be called as a macroeconomic approach. Whenever we are discussing about the definitions which were given by K.E. Boulding, microeconomics is the study of particular firm, particular household, individual prices, wages, incomes, individual industries, particular commodities. That part we are calling it as microeconomics. Whereas macroeconomics deals not with individual quantities as such, but with aggregate of these quantities, not with individual incomes, but with national income, not with individual prices, but with the price level, not with individual outputs, but with the national output. So this was the definition which was given by Professor K.E. Boulding. So these are the different branches of economics. One is microeconomics and the second one is macroeconomics. Microeconomics means we are discussing about the neoclassical approach, that is free market we will be discussing, whereas in macroeconomics that is classical, that is free market. And in microeconomics the development economics we will be discussing, and whereas in macroeconomics that government intervention. Whenever we are discussing about the microeconomics, the environmental aspects, and whereas we were discussing the state how it will control, and here psychological effects will be discussed in the microeconomics, whereas in macroeconomics that free market how it will be there and how it will control money. So all this will be discussed. So now in this session we have discussed what are the different aspects which are relating to the microeconomics and macro.